What's up, guys? It's that time of the week. Time for another episode of the Road Racing 360 show presented by 1833 CJ Knows. It is the last week before the MotoGP season starts, so we're going to wrap up all the news before racing season officially gets underway. Big thank you to the show sponsor 1833 CJ Knows Accident and Injury Law for making this all possible. Call 1833 CJ Knows if you've been in an accident or wrongfully injured, and they will take care of you. They ride, they race, and they know the law. 1833 CJ Knows Accident and Injury Law. And since it is the last week before MotoGP season starts, that means we need to get the final update on Marc Marquez and if he is going to race or not. Luckily, that was announced. Unfortunately, it was not the answer that many were hoping for, unless you are a MotoGP racer, actually. In last week's episode, we did cover how Marc was finally back on a bike on an RC213VS, that street model, while he was back on it again at Portimao. He was riding in the Portuguese circuit, trying to get back into shape at a more physical track. Although he did get to ride there on that street version of their MotoGP bike, it was announced that he will miss the first two rounds at Qatar for the 2021 season. Now it'll be interesting to see what that means for the championship and if some of his rivals can take advantage of this two-race head start and maximize the points. Now will somebody be able to take the first two races and come out with a 50-point head start on Marc Marquez? That we'll find out. But it will be really important for these two races especially to maximize the points for these guys that are going to be up front and in the hunt for the championship. Now we will see if Marquez can come back and be the force that he has been since he's entered the MotoGP class, but there's still a lot of unknowns considering he hasn't been on a big bike up until recent weeks. So round 3 is when we're going to potentially get our first shot at seeing a new Marc Marquez. And that is going to be a telltale sign of how the championship could go and if he is still going to be a title contender come the end of the season. In MotoGP, there is rumblings of a new track. So from the designers that designed Termas de Rio Hondo, the track in Argentina that MotoGP goes to, there is a rendering and some onboard footage of a simulation of this new track coming in Hungary that is attempting to host a MotoGP race, possibly come 2023 or so. Now, according to the designers, it is approximately 5 kilometers in length with 15 turns and an average speed of 184 kilometers an hour. That would make it the second fastest track in the World Championship. And if you want to see an entire video of what this track would look like, head to the link here and you can check that out. So if you watch the video, you will notice that there are a handful of spots that will be good for overtakes, as well as a fair amount of elevation change there. So it'll be exciting to see if this track does come to fruition and if it makes it on the MotoGP calendar here in the next few years. So now touching on a little bit more news from MotoGP testing, but this does not come from a team. MotoGP teams are not the only ones that will test when it comes to these tests. This news actually comes from Michelin, the spec tires supplier for the MotoGP series. Now, over the offseason, the tires have undergone a little bit of an evolution from what they were last year. So the Michelin manager, Piero Taramasso, did say that, "I'm very proud of what the Michelin staff has done in Clermont-Ferrand and what they have achieved. Despite the difficult circumstances they have had to face while working with the current technical framework, they've managed to build on the experience gained in 2020, thoroughly re-examining our range of tires for MotoGP. Our preseason testing program helped us achieve our development goals, and the results are extremely encouraging. It means that we'll be able to provide riders with a simpler and more versatile range that, in turn, will facilitate fine-tuning the bike. We also improved the consistency by switching to slightly harder compounds while maximizing grip and performance. These improvements were praised by the tests in Qatar, where our tires did help set 2 new MotoGP records for Losail, the fastest lap as well as the highest speed ever." We'll see if these new Michelin tires that are slightly different will play a role like they have in previous seasons and what sort of evolution that has gone. As you remember, many teams have found that their bike works better than others at some tracks depending on what tires they're able to use. So interesting to see what the teams think once we actually get under race situations. And then finally, Moto2 did have their final test before the season gets going at Qatar. By the end of the 3 days, 19 riders were covered under a second come the final session of the test. So pretty impressive. As always, Moto2 is extremely close, and it really is a game of tenths and hundredths of a second. And since these guys did get to test for 3 days at a track that the first 2 rounds will be held at, we'll see who got their testing done and what improvements and developments are made by these riders over the couple days, or I suppose couple weeks in between the test and the race. Top 5 ended up being Sam Lowes, Marco Bezzecchi, Remy Gardner, Jake Dixon, and Xavi Vierge. After that, riders were separated by, hundredths of seconds all the way back until where the first rider outside of a second was Tom Ludi down in 20th. Americans Cameron Beaubier and Joe Roberts did finish 13th and 14th respectively, and were just about 7/10 of a second out of the lead. Now remember, if you look back, Joe Roberts did set pole here last year and end up 4th in the race, so he has some experience and good results here in the past. We'll see if he can step that up and get closer towards the front, as well as see how Cam Beaubier's maiden race in Moto2 will turn out in the first round of Qatar. And that's going to wrap it up for our MotoGP news. Tune in this weekend if you have the MotoGP Video Pass or wherever it is televised, wherever you're watching, and get prepared for the opening round of MotoGP. Qatar has usually been an exciting battle the last few years, coming down to the final corner. Hopefully this year's no exception. I'm excited to see all 3 classes get going and see what the season start looks like after such a long offseason. Jumping into World Superbike, we did see a little bit of news coming from there. A couple teams were able to test outside of that test that we talked about last episode. So I don't have a ton of news or output exactly as far as lap times go from that test. But Kawasaki and Honda did get a chance to test some more, I believe, at Jerez. And with that, our real only news comes from the factory Ducati team. We did see what the new Aruba.it Ducati is going to look like, that both Scott Redding and Michael Ruben Rinaldi will be on for the 2021 season. Not a huge difference from last year. Same basic scheme with the red and the black. I actually really like this bike though. I think it looks really slick. A couple minor differences, but I've always been a fan of Ducati's World Superbike. Actually, really all of Ducati's bikes, but especially their World Superbike Panigale V4. I think it looks really sick and sounds incredible. So we'll see what the Ducati guys can do if they can finally make this year the year they take it to Johnny Ray and Kawasaki. Jumping overseas to Moto America, another Ducati was revealed, and it is the Ducati Warhorse HSBK bike that Loris Baz will be on for the Moto America Superbike Series. Well, it doesn't look like this is Loris's final, maybe leather design. He probably has something else special coming from Alpine Star. The bike though, man, the bike looks sick. Nothing too crazy, it's pretty simple, but the red, white, and black really just complements each other. I think looks super awesome. I'll be excited to see what they do here in the first test next weekend at COTA. Now moving on to some rider announcements that we have from Moto America. It was announced that Jason Uribe is going to be jumping back into a full season of Moto America for the first time in a few years. Now, Jason is an accomplished rider that does have experience overseas and found success over there in British Superbike and the French Superbike Series. Now, this will be his chance after racing select rounds on a Honda CBR 1000 in the last few seasons to finally get his hand at a full series in the Superbike class. Jason's going to be racing for Fly Racing ADR Motorsports on a Suzuki GSXR 1000, and after setting a series track record last weekend at Buttonwillow, it looks like he's coming to grips with the bike pretty well so far. So it'll be interesting. He's got, obviously, the teammate and team owner, Aussie Dave, who is very fast on a bike and obviously shown how capable he is. And to see a young gun like Jason that has proven that he does have the speed on a bike that is better than the old Honda that he's ridden in seasons past, I'm excited to see what he does, and seeing where he's been in the previous select races where he's been kind of around that 6th to 8th range. It'll be interesting to see, especially as the season progresses and he gets more time on the bike, if he'll be able to make that jump and compete with some of the guys closer towards the top 5 or better. I think he's got the skills to do it. It just depends, how he can come to grips with that Suzuki and really how everybody else shakes out, because there's a lot of fast guys in Superbike, but I think Jason's in a good situation to prove that he is a very solid rider and very deserving of this ride. Moving on, we finally figured out what is going on with Richie Escalante. There is a lot of speculation that he was going to be trying to move up to the Superbike class for 2021. We did find out that, unfortunately, is not happening. Now, what exactly went into the decision for him to decide to come back and defend his Super Sport title, I'm not sure. I'm guessing probably something to do with budgeting. I was really hoping to see Richie maybe jump up there on a Kawasaki ZX-10 with support from Graves, but I suppose with Honos and everything, they weren't quite able to work that out as much as I'm sure they wanted for something like that to happen. But it will be cool to see him come back to Super Sport on that Kawasaki ZX-6 that did cause a little bit of an uproar within the paddock last year, and it'll be cool to see him battle it out back with Sean Dale and Kelly for another season. I think both these guys are young riders that are going to go really far in their careers, but at this point in time, we are fortunate enough to watch them race against each other. And with that said, it was officially finally announced that Sean Dale and Kelly would be remaining with the M4 X-Star Suzuki team. Obviously, that was sort of somewhat assumed, considering he did race with the team at the Daytona 200, where he finished second a few weekends ago. And it was announced that him and Sam Lockoff, as previously announced, would be the riders for the Super Sport team. Now, on top of that, for M4 X-Star Suzuki, they did announce they would have a stock 1000 rider, and that would be Wyatt Ferris. Over the last few seasons, Wyatt has been racing club races in California and been able to, chase some contingency money there. And this season, he is going to make the jump back to the pro racing ranks. He has had some success there previously in the Super Sport classes and been able to consistently be a podium contender in that class years ago. So now it'll be interesting to see what a good bike and a decent rider can do with a very stacked stock 1000/Superbike Cup class. It seems like the roster for that class keeps stacking up and is going to be very stout. So if you're racing stock 1000, there's going to be a lot of guys to contend with that are going to be on good machinery and very accomplished riders. Now, also worth mentioning, it was announced that Corey Alexander would be teaming up efforts with Richie Escalante in their Kawasaki, but Corey would be continuing to race the stock 1000 and Superbike Cup. I'll be excited to see what he can do. He was able to capture some race wins and finish up there in the top 3 nearly every weekend. So Corey's going to be fighting for the title in that as well. And it'll be cool to see the efforts of him and Richie Escalante's team sort of combine and hopefully make it more cost effective for both those guys. It'd be cool to see them team up for 2022 and maybe put together a Superbike effort. But time will tell what happens there. I'm just excited to see more guys going racing. That's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of the Road Racing 360 Show, presented by 1833 CJ Knows Accident and Injury Law. As I mentioned, MotoGP kicks off this weekend, so tune in, and we'll be doing a little wrap-up of what happens there at the first round in Qatar. Super excited to see this finally get going. The off-season's been so long. I'm finally excited to start reporting on some more racing instead of just livery reveals, rider announcements. As cool as all that is, man, racing is way cooler. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week to see what happened at Qatar and other racing news throughout the world. From your boys at Road Racing 360, have a great week. We'll see you next episode.